And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Sunday, February 2nd, 2025. And starting with the sea ice, the edge of that is such it's down through about the middle portion of the Bering to around St. Matthew, and then even down into, we've seen some regrowth this past week with the cold outflow winds that we had and temperatures below zero here in through the interior. So at least there has been some redevelopment of ice the past week in through Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, but now we're seeing a southerly flow of air with temperatures above freezing in the mid-30s, so there will be some melt-off along the ice edge. And with southerly flow continuing for, it looks like, the longer term, beyond another week, the tendency will be for ice to want to shift northward again. Now, in the weather map, the big weather feature is this surface high pressure, Canadian high over northwest Canada, central pressure up to 1055 millibars, causing strong outflow winds here in the Panhandle. Areas of the Panhandle will have some freezing spray to worry about, some heavier freezing spray, especially tonight into Monday morning. Back to the west, here's this front, not especially strong in the process of troughing out, but nevertheless there is a little bit of snow along it and some gusty winds, especially up along areas of the Seward Peninsula and then the Lisburn Peninsula up around Point Hope. As we go into Monday, the Arctic high over northwest Canada remains. We still have those offshore outflow winds in the Panhandle. North and west of the Alaska Range, strong temperature inversion in the lower levels of the atmosphere. Thanks to this high, there's actually a very strong mid and upper level high pressure ridge right over this region like this. So it's trapping moisture beneath that inversion, and that's why areas of the Yukon, upper Kuskokwim valleys are seeing low clouds and fog. But along the west coast, there will continue to be some areas of snow and blowing snow, especially western northern parts of the Seward Peninsula on up toward the Lisburn Peninsula. And getting into Tuesday, still high pressure, maybe not quite as strong. The cold air, the Arctic air that's been in the eastern interior and pushed into parts of the Panhandle will begin to moderate a bit. Still, though, below normal temperatures are expected along the Alcan border and in through the Panhandle this upcoming week. We'll be watching some other weather systems starting to come up out of the North Pacific, but for the time being, most of that should stay away from the Gulf for this upcoming week. But within the inner channels here this Sunday night into Monday morning, we have heavy freezing spray warnings for areas of Lynn Canal and Stevens Passage. We're looking at north winds 25-30 knots, waves 5-6 feet. Northeast winds to 25 knots there, Metlakatla and Ketchikan, Dixon Entrance. Offshore winds, Sitka southward, generally northeasterly at 20 to 25 knots. Not quite as strong as you get west of Gustavus, outside of Yakutat and Cape Suckling, north winds 10 to 15 knots. On Tuesday, winds for the inner channel, still gusty there. Lynn Canal could have north winds of 35 knots, 4-foot waves, and north winds of 20 to 25 knots. Stevens Passage down to Dixon Entrance, and again Sitka south to off of Craig, we're looking at northeasterly winds at 20 to 25 knots, whereas up toward Cape Suckling winds will be northerly at 10 knots. Locally could be some stronger winds out of Yakutat Bay or there at the Copper River Delta. But within the northwestern Gulf, variable winds just 10 knots within Prince William Sound off the Kenai coast and outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, maybe a little stronger again along the Copper River Delta because we still have that outflow there. And then northeast winds 10 to 15 knots, upper mid Cook Inlet, turning northwesterly across lower Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay to Kennedy Entrance, 15 to 25 knots. And then on Tuesday, still variable winds, only around 10 knots, Prince William Sound off the Kenai coast, outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. Northeast to north winds as we drop down through the upper and middle Cook Inlet, and then again 15-knot northwesterly winds, Kamishak Bay and out there toward Kennedy Entrance. On Monday, variable winds within Shelikof Strait, 10 knots. Also variable 10-knot winds around Bristol Bay, westerly winds south and east of Akiak, turning back toward the south-southeast through the lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula. And then on Tuesday, still variable winds within Shelikof Strait and Bristol Bay. Winds will be west-northwest, Akiak toward just east of Chicknick. And then again, turning more south to southeasterly, 15 to 20 knots, Sand Point down through Cold Bay and False Pass. The Aleutians, strongest winds will be across the eastern Aleutians. Not strong at all, though, by their standards. Winds east-southeast, 25 knots. As we get out toward the middle Aleutians, look for southeast winds becoming southerly at 15 knots, extending all the way out toward Kiska and Shemya. And then on Tuesday, we'll find 20 to 25 knot southeasterly winds around Dutch Harbor on Alaska. Southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, Nikolsky through Atka and Adak. As you get west of Adak, they'll look for easterly winds generally around 20 knots. Along the southwest coast, Monday, areas, wider expanse of Bristol Bay could see easterly winds of 10 knots, southeast winds to 20 knots within Kuskokwim Bay. Strongest winds will be up along the Yukon Delta into Norton Sound. Look for southerly winds at 20 to 30 knots. So the ice is going to have a tendency to want to try to retreat northward as that weakening frontal boundary works its way east. Also, temperatures along and ahead of this front are going to be a little bit above freezing, at least into the mid-30s. And on Tuesday, we find southeast winds 10 knots within Bristol Bay, 20 knots within Kuskokwim Bay, southerly winds 20 knots, 6-8 foot waves there along the Pribilovs. And then from the Yukon coastline up into Norton Sound, south winds of 20 to 25 knots. Strongest winds, though, by far are going to be out here through the Bering Strait and the Chukchi Sea. South-southeast gales 35 to 40 knots. There can be some blowing snow, light snow accumulations along western northern parts of the Seward Peninsula, and especially up here rounding the Lisburn Peninsula, including Point Hope to Point Lay. So you could have reduced visibilities there and snow, light snow and blowing snow. And then as we go along the Beaufort Sea coast, Utqiagvik to Kaktovik, look for southwest to west winds at 20 to 25 knots. On Tuesday, winds will be southwest to west, 25 knots along the Beaufort Sea. As we drop down from Wainwright to Cape Lisburn, Point Hope, areas there, southwest to south winds to 30 knots. Winds will fall off a bit, but still southerly through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait to the west side of the Seward Peninsula and the north side of St. Lawrence Island. Generally southerly winds of 20 knots are expected on Tuesday.